All right, joining me now live is Brian Fonseca. He's the director of the Jack D. Gordon Institute for Public Policy and an adjunct professor in the Department of Politics and International Relations at Florida International University. Great to have you here on the program. You know, it seemed like the big focus today was on combating drug cartels in the region. How much of a practical effect do you think this coalition can really have on a problem that's been plaguing Latin America for decades?
Yeah, first and foremost, what was really interesting is that the president convened countries that were already pretty aligned with American interests, countries in which the U.S. has had some pretty significant, relationships developed during the Trump administration. I think the spirit of that was to, build a coalition of countries that were like-minded, that it felt it could certainly, move policy through. And part of that was a compelling, argument that the military as an instrument of power should be unlocked to go after cartels, which has been an issue that has largely been dealt with by weak law enforcement institutions. So I think this is the U.S. signaling that it's willing to lend its military institution, its military muscle, and encouraging countries to leverage their militaries in order to combat an issue that has largely been left to law enforcement institutions that have been plagued by corruption, sort of weak institutional structure, and lack of material support to go after these incredibly complex, sophisticated, and very strong transnational criminal organizations.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of some of the allies, I guess, of President Trump. Argentina's leader there, Costa Rica, longtime U.S. ally, El Salvador, of course, Bukele there, a big friend of Donald Trump. I think it's also worth talking about China. Is that kind of the elephant in the room here for this coalition? The White House has been very concerned and very vocal about China's increasing influence in Latin America.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely the undertone. I mean, while much of the public discourse was around combating transnational organized crime, which is certainly one of the platforms that the president's promised the American people, the undertone is the broader context of strategic denial. Again, this is on the backdrop of a U.S. national security strategy that focuses on the Western Hemisphere and the sort of resurrection of strategic denial, or what's being referred to as the Don Road Doctrine. This idea that America wants to push back against the prospect of China further deepening its access and influence in the Western Hemisphere. And so I think the undertone and the context of this summit was really bringing like-minded countries together in an effort to build coalitions around real practical issues, while also sort of keeping an undertone that's focused on competing and pushing China back out of the region.
We heard the president's comments there again about Cuba, saying that the country's at the end of the line. Cuba's president, Miguel Diaz-Canel, actually responded. He called this Latin American summit neo-colonial. He said it was only right-wing governments there attending. I guess it's important kind of to underscore, there were countries that were not there. And I think, Cuba, obviously one of them, but Mexico, I think another big one that simply didn't attend.
Yeah, Mexico wasn't there, Brazil or Colombia wasn't there. And I think, again, the spirit of this was, most of these multilateral fora that happen in the Western Hemisphere are often contentious. It brings countries of a variety of different political perspectives together. And sometimes, I guess the Washington perspective is it didn't want to have to, kind of move aggressively through all of this tense discussion around its policy interests, but rather focus on the relationship it has with countries of like-mindedness in the region and focus there. That doesn't mean the United States hasn't been paying attention to the others. In fact, last month, President Trump met with Petro. Obviously, there's incredible engagement going on with Mexico, as evidenced in the successful attack that U.S. intelligence supported against El Mencho in Mexico. And of course, the president's invited Lula to the White House as well. And so I don't think that means that the other countries are less important. I think it means just in the context of this multilateral forum, the U.S. wanted to pull together countries that wasn't going to have to, kind of muscle through resistance or tension in order to pursue its respective policy interests.
Brian Fonseca there from the Florida International University. Always great to get your perspective. Thank you very much.